I'll vote for you. I did tell her we had to repark the cars.
Good afternoon, everyone. I would like to welcome you to the Wednesday, March 27th meeting of CCWD. Would you all please rise and join me in the pledge? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, Rebecca, would you please call the roll?
Director Cicada?
Here.
Director Thomas?
I am here.
Director Redmond?
Here.
Director Underhill?
Here.
And Director Davidson is absent.
Okay. At this time, this is a public comment period. Members of the public can address the board on any non-agendized item. The public is encouraged to work through staff to place items on the agenda for consideration, and no action can be taken on matters that are not listed on the agenda. So the comments will be limited to 3 minutes per person. So is there anyone here that would like to address the board?
I have a comment, but it's regarding the copper outflows.
Okay,
Do I do that?
at that time would be the appropriate time. Thanks, Ralph. Okay, if there's no one else wishing to speak on a non-agendized item, then let's go to the consent agenda. Okay, items can be placed upon or will be acted upon by the board at one time without discussion. Any board member may request that any item be removed for later discussion. We only have one item on the consent agenda.
Move for acceptance?
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Could you please poll the board?
Director Cicada? Yes. Director Redmond?
Yes.
Director Underhill?
Yes.
Director Thomas?
I vote affirmatively. So we have approved the minutes of the meeting of the, that was way back in January. Okay. Long time ago. That was, a lot of things have happened since then. Okay, going on to new business. We have an item 4A. This is a presentation on non-flow measures in the proposed McCollum River Voluntary Settlement Agreement for Phase 2 implementation of the Bay Delta Plan. Peter.
Thank you, Mr. President. So today we have a presentation by East Bay Mud talking about some of the non-flow measures that have been proposed in the March 1st proposal that was submitted to the State Board. This has been something that's been worked on for several years now. Kind of lots of agencies up and down the entire Delta, and we've been working with a group of stakeholders in the McCollum River. A lot of phone calls once a week. We have check-ins and talk a lot about the progress on these proposals. And so that kind of culminated in a proposal that I included in an appendix to that proposal in your packet. But a lot of what's been discussed to date with regard to Phase 1 and Phase 2 of the State Board's Water Quality Control Plan has been mostly focused on flow, but there is an opportunity here to incorporate a lot of non-flow measures, those being measures that are more focused on improving fish habitat and things like that. So today we have Michelle here to give a presentation and talk a little bit about that and tout some of the successes on the McCollum River and focus more on those things that are being proposed in lieu of additional water in some cases, or just as part of a holistic approach to meeting the State Board's mandates. So I'll introduce Michelle Workman from East Bay Mud.
I just have a question or two here for you. This is a presentation on the Phase 2 that I have thought that is going to be a supplemental consideration after Phase 1 has been sort of finalized.
Sure. So Phase 1, the State Board actually took an action on that late last year to approve the substitute environmental document and things like that. At this point with Phase 2, they're starting to pull together many of the proposals for voluntary settlements, which is what the state had originally asked for. And the goal is to put that package together. There's some negotiating going on that still, and Michelle can probably talk more to this. But the idea is that ultimately a substitute environmental document will be released for Phase 2 late this year for approval. And so the idea is that these voluntary settlements can be packaged up so that the state board knows exactly what they're evaluating in their substitute environmental docket that they'll be taking later on this year. So that's kind of where we're at in this part of the negotiations and the settlements associated with that, and their process for making amendments to the Bay Delta plan for phase 2. So.
Okay, thank you for that. And the other thing is, on your last paragraph, you used a word slew, but it's spelled S-L-E-W, which I would think that water considerations would be S-O-U-G-H.
Yeah, thanks for pointing that out. Yeah, I don't think that was intentional, but yeah, definitely.
Where are you from, boy?
Trying to say there was a slew of, maybe there's a slew of projects too. All right.
Good job, Peter.
Okay, thank you.
It's a pun.
Michelle?
It's a pun.
A pun.
Perfect, thanks.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you. I hope there's no typos on my slide.
They'll catch it.
I see the bar. Okay, thanks for inviting me to come speak. Please feel free to interrupt me at any time if you have any questions about what I'm going to talk about. I want to also preface this by just saying that these are proposed non-flow measures. We've been in negotiations with Department of Fish and Wildlife and the California Natural Resource Agency. These haven't been approved, but this is the package that we're putting forward. For the presentation overview, I was just going to highlight some of what's going on in the water quality control plan process, what the fisheries goals and objectives are for these non-flow measures, some habitat criteria that were given to us by the agencies that we're trying to target, and then go through our non-flow proposal, and then end on a positive note with some of the current successes for the McCollum River fisheries. So very generally speaking, you guys probably know that the state board is really responsible for establishing water quality control measures and flow requirements to provide reasonable protection for all of the beneficial uses of water in the Bay Delta area. The urgent need now, and while they're redoing the water quality control plan for that area, the urgent need is fisheries and aquatic species. So that's been a lot of the focus of what they're looking for improvements in. Phase 1 was the San Joaquin system, which Peter alluded to is sort of wrapped up for now. And then phase 2 is the Sacramento Basin, which the McCollum River falls into. Unfortunately for the McCollum River, we're a little bit outside of the San Joaquin and Sacramento Basin. We consider ourselves an east side tributary with a little bit different needs and goals, and so we've tried to incorporate those into our non-flow measures. So the board's original resolution for the update for the water quality control plan is really to look at an unimpaired flow scenario. So they're targeting percentages of unimpaired flow to sort of fix the problem from a single point. But the framework that they developed in updating the plan also allows for voluntary agreements as another mechanism, as long as those agreements can meet the same desired outcomes, and that's what we're working on. The McCollum stakeholders, including you all, have been negotiating with Department of Fish and Wildlife and the Natural Resources Agency on this proposed VA for about 18 to 20 months. And our holistic proposal includes both flow and non-flow, but I'll only be talking about the non-flow measures. And these are 15-year agreements, so anything that we come to resolution on will be a 15-year agreement. So we were given some specific fish targets to meet as part of this process. The CVPIA law, the Central Valley Project Improvement Act law, requires for doubling of anadromous fish in the Bay Delta area. And so for the McCollum River, our natural fish doubling goal is 9,300 adult salmon into the river every year. We're given and sort of arbitrary hatchery percentage for those fish of 40%. So if we take that 40% out, that leaves 5,580 natural spawners. That's our target that they want us to be able to support with these non-flow measures. From those 5,580 adults, the assumption is that those will produce 7.4 million juveniles. And so that's what we need to support for the juvenile habitat. And then the habitat targets for juvenile fish, the main channel that's wetted all year round needs to be able to support 100% of those fish at any one time. And then floodplain that they want, that's overbank inundated habitat during high water years, needs to be able to support 50% of those fish. And so I tabled out Basically, what we have currently, oh, that doesn't point on the screen. What we have currently, what is needed, and then what the balance is, right? So that's fine, Peter. I don't need to point too much, I don't think. Oh, thanks. Yeah, just so we can track the table a little bit better. I don't want to lose everybody. So we have, this is what, according to the fish agencies, what they want to see, what we need to support these populations. So we need a total of 8.5 acres of spawning habitat. We need 100 acres of juvenile habitat within the wetted channel. And then another 49 acres of suitable habitat, which is a proportion of total habitat. So 183 total acres of overbank inundated habitat. We have some of our own models in-house, and we already know that we have almost 12 acres of spawning habitat, 70 acres of in-stream habitat, and depending on flow, we can sustain this number of juvenile floodplain acres for 18 days in a high water year and 16 days at a below normal year. So the bottom line is, we don't even need to provide any more spawning habitat. We've been putting in spawning gravel and managing spawning habitat for over 20 years. It's really good. For the in-stream habitat, we're short about 30 acres. The interesting conundrum is that to improve the in-stream habitat, lower flows actually improves the habitat based on habitat suitability. So small fish like shallower water and slower velocities. So the way we're proposing to do that is by putting in structure, cover, boulders, large wood, and things like that that juvenile fish can use for habitat. So there's no flow needed for that. And then for the floodplain habitat, we're, like I said, we can already meet those with the existing flow proposal we have on the table. All right. So then the habitat criteria, so they're very specific about what they want us to provide, not just the space, but how the space works out. So the inundation duration, so anything that we flood up, floodplain habitat, has to be flooded for 18 to 20 days in order to provide food benefits and growth benefits for fish. They said around 15 days could be acceptable, but 10 or less is absolutely not acceptable. The habitat quality, as we build floodplain habitat, we're only getting credit for about 1/4 of every acre we build as being suitable, and that's just based on hydraulic modeling. And then that habitat needs to inundate every 2 out of 3 years. So a salmon has a 3-year life cycle, so we want to make sure we're supporting 2 out of 3 years so we don't strand any cohorts. So we arranged our non-flow measures into 4 categories. We have 11 measures. We really want to target rearing improvements, that's juvenile fish, their migration habitat and issues in the hatchery, gravel habitat programs, and then research and monitoring. So I'm just going to step through each one of these fairly quickly. So we're offering up 50 acres of new floodplain habitat in the first 7 miles. You'll recall we said we already have enough, but we're offering as a good faith effort to build some more. We've identified some private landowners that are interested and willing, and we have proof of concept. We've built these. This is a floodplain feature that we've actually built in the McCollum River Day Use area, just below Comanche Dam, so we know we can build good, suitable habitat. The cost for that would be about $5 million over 15 years. The other thing that we want to do to help improve the rearing condition is predation management. So we want to be able to go out there and identify where we know the predators are at and reduce those predator-prey interactions. It's an evaluation for the first 2 years and actions in years 3 through 15 with an annual funding base of about 500,000 fish. And just for fun, that bag right there contains 32 salmon smolts that we got out of 1 striper stomach. So they can really decimate a population if the striper numbers are high. So we have good data going in, but we want to make it better. Another thing that we can do to improve the rearing condition is screening diversions. We have over 66 riparian diversions in the lower McCollum River between Comanche Dam and tidal influence just below Woodbridge. So we're offering to screen 5 to 10 of those high priority diversions. It costs about $160,000 per screen. We already have a grant that will fund screening of 3, and we're working through the environmental documentation for that. So those will be good a good starting point to show a good faith effort that we want to make this better. For the migration, habitat, and hatchery components, currently all hatchery fish are marked at a 25% rate, so that helps expand the numbers when they're caught in the ocean. They can tell how many fish are caught from each facility. In year 4, DFW has asked that we move to 100% mark and a 25% tag. There's a significant cost attached to that. The funding here is identified at $2 million annually, and that's one of our measures. A hatchery and genetics management plan. This is really a measure trying to get a little back from DFW. We've been operating without a hatchery and genetics management plan in the McCollum River Fish Hatchery for many, many years. This plan is actually a requirement from National Marine Fisheries Service to have a permit to work with the fish we're working with. So we're basically working without a permit, and the holdup is in CDFW's corner. And so we put this on the table. It's like, we're willing to get this done. You got to help us. You got to button this one up. And so this is a one-time cost of $500,000. A hatchery improvement program. So if we're gonna start marking and tagging fish at a much higher rate, we're gonna need infrastructure to do that. We don't have the space or the equipment to do that. We need those infrastructure improvements both to comply with the HGMP that we hope to get on board and to support that tagging. And so that's an additional $500,000 annually for the first 5 years. Once the infrastructure's there, then that cost will go away. An optimized released program, that's code for barging. Barging raises a lot of red flags for different groups of people, and so we sort of changed the titling of it. But basically, our argument here is that some of the biggest impacts to our juvenile fish are in the Central Delta. And because of where we're located, there's really not much relief for us. All of the Sacramento Basin fish have proposals to sort of make sure the fish are going around the west side of the Delta and out. They call it the North Delta Arc. And so they're working on habitat restoration and moving flows to move fish out through that area. Our fish can't take advantage of that. Our fish enter the Delta south of the Crash Channel, and they have to go through the Central Delta. It's a place of really high mortality. We know that from years of study. So what we want to do is, at least in the beginning, we want to be able to put our fish in a barge, a portion of our fish in a barge. And what that means is they will get the water signals as they go. So it'll be a recirculating barge. So they'll fill the water chemicals as they go through, and that's part of their homing process. And then we're hoping to get returns. We've done this experimentally for 3 years and gotten pretty good returns, reduced straying, and improved survival. So the proposal here is for 1 million hatchery juveniles every year, and 25% of the natural production would get barged out. And that is a cost. In the first 3 years, it's about $1 million in capital costs. We have to build a barge and build facilities to take care of these fish, and then $500,000 annually to implement that. For our gravel programs, we have, one of our proposals is just maintenance. So we've put in, over the past 20 years, a couple $1 million worth of gravel, about 90,000 cubic yards of gravel. We've put in a lot of effort already to improving the spawning habitat. But one of the things we did was we modeled the upper reach and we sort of sloped it down so that the river will continue to move that gravel. So that requires ongoing maintenance. So we'll constantly have to be putting gravel in at the top of the river so the river can move it around and make it into gravel beds. So that's for 500 to 1,000 yards of gravel in this upper restored reach, and that's just right below Comanche Dam. And on top of just maintaining the gravel we've already put in, we're also making a commitment to find 4 new project areas to do new gravel enhancements, so make new spawning beds in different areas. And that's at a cost of about $200,000 per project. And then we believe that research and monitoring is really important. A lot of these items don't mean anything if you can't measure the metrics and see if they're working, if they're not working. So we want to make sure we have some research and monitoring that's supported by this agreement. fish community assessments. So that's basically just monitoring the entire fish population. This helps us look at ecosystem health overall, our proportions of native and non-native fish, if those are changing. It helps us to cue in on predator species, where they are, when they're active, when they're reproducing. And this is a nominal cost of $30,000 annually for the life of the agreement. And then also for monitoring research, we have a steelhead population on the McCollum River. Steelhead, the natural population is listed in the 5-year status review. NIMS has alluded to the fact that they would like to list the hatchery population as well. Under this administration, that likely won't happen, but this president won't be around forever. So if the hatchery population gets listed, we'll have to deal with that additional workload. But we want to make sure we're getting a good assessment of the existing steelhead population. So that means more tagging, maybe changes in hatchery practices, and more monitoring at a cost of about $200,000 annually. There is a funding proposal on the table. Basically, we wanted to highlight what East Bay Mud is already currently spending on the river annually, what East Bay Mud, along with the stakeholders, have offered up to the table as new funding, what we propose to go out for new grants that we know might be available, what our expectations of Fish and Game will be as supporting that through funding. And so this is just a look for a total cost of all of this is about $60 million, and it's about 50% supported by East Bay Mud. And now the good news. This is our hatchery population from 1940 to 2018. You can see here we divide the adult Chinook population into 3 time periods. Before Comanche was built, the average was right here, just under 4,000. After Comanche was built, it went up a little bit, but still just right around 4,000. In 1998, we signed a joint settlement agreement as part of our FERC proceedings that required more flow and some non-flow measures that we're already implementing. And you can see the average fish population has jumped up here to over 10,000 fish. So one of the negotiating points we bring to the table is that we already gave a lot. We gave a lot in this FERC proceeding, and we're already setting a high bar. And so there's just a nominal lift that we can do at this point because we're already doing a pretty good job of managing fish. In 2017, we had a record return of almost 20,000 fish, and last year we had 17,474. So the numbers are really good going into this from a negotiation perspective. This is a look at, I talked earlier about that Central Valley doubling goal target that all of the CVPI streams are required to manage for. So these are the doubling targets for each of these rivers, and these are the average escapement for the years where doubling is calculated. And you can see we're the only river in the system that's anywhere close to doubling. And I had this slide prepared with an extra year. If you add an extra year on it, we're at 103%. Unfortunately, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service hasn't published those data yet. I've seen them. We can't really say it. But just know, for future, we're going to be at over 100 here very shortly. And not only are we meeting those targets back to the river, but we're contributing in a really substantial way to the ocean harvest, recreational and commercial. If you look at this breakdown, the San Joaquin Basin is contributing 33% to the recreational fishery in 2018 and 45% to the commercial. The Merced is the only other hatchery in that contribution number, and their contributions are less than 2%. And so that's almost wholly McCollum fish. And if you look at each one of those other rivers, the Sacramento Basin is producing a little bit more for the ocean harvest, but if you look at each river individually, we're well surpassing each of the major rivers in the Sacramento Basin and contributing to the ocean fisheries. That gives us a lot of credibility with non-governmental organizations like Golden Gate Salmon Association or Pacific Fishermen's Federation.
Can I ask you a question, Michelle?
You can.
The fish that are on in that report, they're at how far north, how far south do they
They
go to capture
report
them?
on all the ports in California. So they have regions that they report to in California, and the report does break down where we're catching those. But generally speaking, our fish are caught from like Fort Bragg south to San Francisco. So they're caught right off the ocean, right when they're coming back coming back home. So,
That's still quite far north to catch a homegrown fish. That's pretty good.
it is, it is.
They got to be more evasive.
Well, no, that's good. So a lot of the fish we're growing, I mean, we produce over 6 million fish a year. 2 million of those are directly targeted for ocean recovery. So we put those out at a little bit bigger size, a little bit farther away from the river, and we want the fishermen in the ocean to catch them. That's specifically what they're grown for. And the rest of those fish are grown for mitigation for the habitat that we've inundated with Comanche and Pardee reservoirs. And those fish we want to come back home. So we manage both of those very differently, but we're really happy to see the ocean. I like to catch fish in the ocean, so I'm happy that the catch is so good. Any other questions?
You had a pretty impressive slide there about the predator that you said had 23 salmon smolt inside. Where did that fish get captured?
That fish got captured. So one of our struggles with our juvenile fish is, as you go down the McCollum River into the town of Lodi, there's a small irrigation impoundment, Lake Lodi, and Woodbridge Irrigation District Dam impounds that. So what happens is, and when we talk about predator-prey interactions, that right there is a real hot spot for predator-prey interaction. So stripers come up into freshwater to spawn in the spring. So they're coming up. At the same time, our juvenile Chinook are coming down. The stripers can't get above Woodbridge Dam, and so they kind of congregate in a nice pool there because they can sit there and not use a lot of energy, and there's a steady source of food coming down across the dam. So one of the things we would like to do is just sort of space out that interaction area. So if we can keep the stripers for a little bit further downstream, or find a way to minimize that interaction when they get through there. But that's one of the biggest places we see. We've done over the past 10 years, we've gone in and we've gotten permits to move stripers out of the basin. So we'll go in like every other week and just shock them up, put them in a tank, and take them back out to the delta. So that way it gives our fish some time to get through. DFW no longer wants to give us permits to do that, so we wrote up a nice study plan to assess the value of a technique called gastric lavage, which is where we actually put pressurized water into the fish's stomach until we blow him up so much that he has to let go of his food, versus lethal take of the stomach for contents. So right now we're conducting a study that allows us to kill 300 stripers a year in the interest of finding out if gastric lavage is an efficient way as taking the entire stomach out of the fish to assess stomach contents. And so we'll write up a report to finalize that, but in the short term, it allows us to sort of get rid of that impact in a short term. But we do want to look at longer term methods to reduce that impact with habitat and structure and flow actions that might help those fish get by that situation a little bit better.
Can you describe what is meant by this shocking the fish up?
So I have I'm not an electrician, but I get to work with electricity and water and people, so it's a little terrifying. But we have a boat that basically has a generator on it, and we put some probes into the water, and we create an electrical current between the probe and the hull of the boat. And fish are actually attracted to that electrical current. It's called galvanotaxis. So they actually feel the electrical current and then swim toward the boat. When they get in the thick of the current, it shocks them enough to make them turn over, and they're easy to net out of the water. It doesn't kill them. And then we can capture them in our boat, and we can take them elsewhere. It's a method we use for a lot of different species. So when we do our fish community assessments, we use that boat, and we go around and we just shock everything that'll turn, and then we say what it is, how many there were, if they were adults or juveniles, if they have eggs, if they have diseases, all that stuff.
Isn't that how you fish and talk?
Well, I was reminded, is there a statute of limitations on hunting and fishing infractions? Because
I bet there is. If you're going to start talking about dynamite, I might just...
No. When I was a kid, I used to go to the Army surplus store and buy these little field telephone thing, and you could hook a wire up to both sides of that and put like an 1.5 inch galvanized of pipe fitting, and you throw it out that way and throw it out that way. Make sure nobody's looking, and you crank it.
Exactly.
And you could get a tub full of catfish.
That's
Really
exactly,
easy.
yeah, you were a born fish biologist. That, we just took that to another level. We have permits to do it. It's all on the up and up.
So you
Excuse me, I'm just curious about the number of employees you have monitoring.
So
Is it program?
I supervise a staff of 9 people. I have 4 biologists, 4 technicians, and we hire 2 seasonals pretty much every year from around October through July. So it takes that many people to get a lot of this work done. We also partner with outside agencies, and we've had a lot of graduate students finish their work on the McCollum River, so it's a great
Perfect.
way
Yes,
to
yes.
get the data analysis portion done and get projects going. So we apply for grants, we get students, and then we have a full staff, which I do have to say is definitely to our advantage. I mean, not many water companies or utilities have a full biological staff. They typically are contracting out for folks to do work, which East Bay Mud did for many, many years until they started hiring a few individuals, and then we made the argument to the union that this was full-time work and it should be union jobs, and we were successful.
Certainly proved to be beneficial to East Bay Mud.
Absolutely,
Yeah,
absolutely.
yeah.
So, Michelle, where are we with the proposed voluntary settlement right now in relation to the water, the State Water Resource Control Board? And then what is the expected timing for it?
Right, so right now, we're still in negotiations. So where this all went was, when we started these negotiations, we were strictly negotiating for a McCollum stakeholder settlement with DFW and Natural Resources Agency. The project has changed a little bit, and now they're looking for a statewide proposal of voluntary agreements. So we've moved from a small group of people negotiating what would happen on the McCollum, which is where we were prior to December. And then in December, Resources Agency and DFW went to the board with this concept of a statewide VA. We were not at the table because we didn't have enough information to know if we were going to participate in that or not. CDFW basically said to us, this is the only place to negotiate now. This is what we're doing. So we're at the table. We haven't made firm commitments, but we're participating at all levels. They have an ungodly number of subgroups, so my staff is not enough to to take care of it. We're sitting in groups that talking about how the governance would work, how the science and adaptive management would work. There's a group called Assets to Outcomes, which is basically talking, the assets are the water, the non-flow measures, the outcomes are the results. And so we're just trying to work through this process of how this all can be folded into one giant voluntary agreement for the Bay Delta region. The timeline for that, for the Water Board, is June 30th. They want something submitted by June 30th so that they can...
year?
This year,
Wow.
so that they can put it in their substitute environmental document that would go out in September. So it's a pretty fast-paced bar. Like I said, my days have been no more fun pumping fish for stomach contents. I'm at meetings in Sacramento like 2 or 3 days a week, along with my manager, sitting at these tables trying to figure out how the McCollum fits in, do we fit in, trying to still push our non-flow and flow measures forward as the right thing to do for us.
It seems like it's not only the right thing to do for us, and looking at the study and what, especially the one slide, it looks like McCollum should be a model of what other
Right.
agencies and districts should be doing on their river. Is that not?
Yeah,
what
and
we're trying to
that's
say?
sort of a double-edged sword, because we're sitting at the table with other watersheds, and the other watersheds are saying, well, how come the McCollum is not being asked to give more? And our argument is, well, I mean, we've given a lot,
Right.
Well, certainly, yeah.
right, and so one of the things is, and I am certainly not a water rights lawyer, but in D-1641, which is water rights decision, they actually attached our water right in D-1641 and had us a requirement to give more during D-1641, and I don't think any other rivers had that requirement. That was a Delta requirement for the projects, for the Central Valley Project and the State Water Project. But they also attached East Bay Mud's water rights. So we actually gave during that process. So right now, we're trying to put that in so that it's known that we were already asked to give a chunk of water. So this is an additional ask for us. So we're not done. There's a lot of negotiating to be done. We, like everyone else, have a board that we have to get approval from, and we have only so much authority to negotiate in bandwidth, and that's where we're at. But a product will come out June 30th.
Wow.
For consideration.
Thank you.
So throughout your presentation here, you haven't once mentioned the 40 to 60% of unimpaired flows and all
Right.
that jargon. But, I mean, this is clear evidence to me that's a pipe dream, that they would ever expect to get any beneficial use out of that type of pulse.
Yeah, and so the bar also for the June 30th is that we have to show comparability. So we have to be able to show how the board's proposal, the 40 to 60% with the target of 55, the outcomes that would be, so we have to model what that would look like versus what this VA would look like, and show that the benefits are either comparable or better for the VAs from the unimpaired flow scenario. So that's the other piece of tying this in. It's not just a matter of saying, this is a great proposal, look at our fish populations, we're doing great. We have to say, why is this proposal more appropriate than 55% of unimpaired flow? And they want some validated comparability. And so even that piece is still being worked out. Like, what's the metric for comparability, and what are the conceptual models that we use to put in all of this information? And so there's a lot of different things going on all at once.
Do you have any ideas of what's causing that?
None of us are touching anything, so.
Don't go away, John. One other thing that flashed up there that you made quick reference to is that if you put in 1 acre of these gravel improvements and stuff, they only give you a 1/4 acre of credit for it.
Yeah.
What's the rationale for that?
So all of those habitat calculations are based on what's called Habitat Suitability Index. So for juvenile Chinook and juvenile steelhead, there's a body of literature that says, a fish this size wants water that's 1 to 4 inches deep, and that's moving at a velocity of X to Y. And so when you build a habitat, obviously the whole habitat isn't going to be uniformly in those habitat suitability curves. So basically there's a curve we're trying to meet. We think we can meet a higher proportion of suitability in the habitat we create. We know we can because we measure it, but they want to make that assumption. And so that way you may have some that's much too shallow as your habitat tails out this way, and where it connects to the river, maybe it's much too deep to fit that suitability curve, and so you have this band of highly suitable habitat. Now the fish don't see the curves, and they use all the habitat, but so that's the bar that is set for us.
And you mentioned Pardee. Is there a fish ladder that will allow the fish to go?
No,
Okay.
and the only reason I mentioned Pardee in passing is the other benefit that we have, because we have Comanche and Pardee. Comanche is kind of a wide, shallow reservoir, so it warms up pretty fast. Pardee is a narrow, deep reservoir, and so it holds cold water very well. And so we have been able to, one of the reasons for our successes, and you notice even through the last 5 years of drought, pre-16, we didn't have any drop in our fish numbers. One of the reasons for that is because even during drought years, we're able to send water from Pardee into Comanche right before fish are coming up in the fall to spawn, to maintain really good spawning temperatures. Most of the rivers in the valley, the American River is a great example, the Sacramento River, they get really high temperatures in the fall because all of their cold water is depleted over summer, because there's a lot of human use of water in the summer, and the projects send a lot of water south in the summer, and so they end up with warm water, and so their fish don't survive very well. Because we have these two reservoirs, we can operate them in tandem, and we can play a little bit with how we send water from Pardee to Comanche to maintain that cold water pool. And that will be one of our arguments against the unimpaired flow scenario, because if we did an unimpaired flow scenario, we would never be able to hold and capture that cold water pool for fall for the fish. We could probably inundate all this floodplain habitat, it would be great in the spring, but we'd have no cold water left in the fall for those fish to spawn in. And if they don't survive from egg to fish, then it doesn't really matter how much floodplain habitat you have to inundate.
Well, I certainly applaud your efforts. It's very interesting and exciting. Any other board questions? How about the public? Do you have any questions that you would like to pose to Michelle? Okay. Seeing none, you have some concluding
Actually, I have a
remarks?
quick question for you, just with regard to your predation management
Oh,
program. How long has that been going on?
The predation
In its current
management,
form,
we started in 2010 with a program to move predators out of the lower McCollum River and back in through the Delta. We also put acoustic tags in those fish so we could track their movement to see how many were coming back and how many were dispersing. So we did that up until our permits expired in 2019, in 2017. When our permits expired, we had planned to do the same thing. And DFW decided that that wasn't an appropriate use of our permit. And so our permit is a scientific collecting permit. And so they said, if you can design a study around what you want to do, then you can do it. But as far as a management action was outside of our authority to be moving fish around, which is fine. Any way we can accomplish it.
I just wanted to speak a little bit to the district's interest in this, and that we've been part of the negotiations on this, just trying to, play a backseat role. East Bay Mud has a team of folks that are very focused on this effort, and I'm thankful there's a level of trust, at least at the staff level, between the two agencies, and they've been really helpful and really useful in getting a lot of information out very quickly, so that we can evaluate things as they're moving along. At some point, the district is probably going to be asked to sign on to a voluntary settlement agreement, whatever is finalized there. One of the things that we had discussed but never got any finality on was, not this board, but just within the group, is that there may be an ask, obviously East Bay Mud's going to be footing 50% of the bill over the life of this agreement. Possibly to do a lot of these measures, we may want to put in some sort of amount of fee towards some of this restoration work in lieu of, we take, 160 acre feet of water out of the McCollum, but, there might be an opportunity for us to help be a part of that too, just to show that we're a good partner on the watershed as well. So,
I think I remember that, there was the thought that we would contribute. Was that thrown out? Yeah, a few years ago.
We had talked about $2 per acre foot, which is, figured out about 160 acre feet a year is, not much, but just something that signals that the district is supportive of, the efforts on the river, and the voluntary settlement agreement would probably be something we should look at. So, my recommendation is.
Very thought-provoking. I appreciate you being here.
Yeah, thank you for the
Thank you
invitation.
very much. Good
Thank you.
information. June's coming up quick.
Okay, next item is 4B. We have a discussion and action on Calaveras Healthy Impact Products Solutions, also known as CHIPS, on this South Fork McCollum River Watershed Restoration Phase 4 Planning Project.
Thank you, Mr. President. I think this is on, okay. I'll make this pretty quick. Essentially, you have had a presentation by Pat McGreevy on this project very recently. The proposal is to have, basically, they've got some grant money recently to do the CEQA evaluations on a few private parcels and also CCWD's parcels, looking at a future project where they look towards a fuel thinning project on those parcels, including ours. Those being the parcels around the West Point wastewater treatment plant and the Wilseyville water treatment plant. And essentially, today we're asking for you to give authorization to the general manager to allow for their contractors to enter that property and do those CEQA evaluations, with the understanding that this may lead to a project on our lands. They would go through eventually, when funding becomes available, and pursue a project to do a fuel thinning project on those lands. We've got a substantial amount of property up in West Point, approximately 112 acres is being proposed for treatment as part of this effort. So I think, basically today, we're asking that you authorize the general manager to allow for that CEQA effort to go forward, and also try to pursue any necessary indemnification for allowing that contractor to get onto that property. So,
Okay. Any questions, Peter?
Yeah, we've heard a lot about this project. We know a lot about CHIPS, and we know this is going on, and the CEQA process was coming up. This makes sense, and I do like the fact that there's a discussion in here about them coming onto the property and wording the contract appropriately to hold us harmless from any of their work, and that's good to see that's in here. I'm certainly in favor of pushing this forward.
That's the important part. Yes, yes.
And it's not likely that this is going to cause the district to incur any charges associated with the tree removal?
That's correct. My understanding is that CHIPS, CHIPS is the lead agency for this project, but Pat McGreevy has worked with CHIPS and also the RCD at times, looking to pursue grant funds for the purposes of continuing to put in a large fuel break that's protective of the communities up there. And this is just part of a contiguous amount of land that's, I think, up to 1,200 plus acres in total. The idea is that BLM has their piece of land, then they would create something that's contiguous between the federal and private lands. And so that's what's being proposed here long term. CCWD has no obligation to provide any funding to pursue that, so, except for maybe possibly some in-kind funds or perhaps some outreach maybe to the community. That might be something we could be approached about at some point. We've talked about it, just the plans. So.
Okay. Did Cindy, any comments? Okay.
Oh, I was going to give her the opportunity to make the motion, and I would second it.
Oh, well, then let me make a motion to go ahead and accept authorizing the general manager to allow CHIPS to move forward with the CEQA.
I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second on this item. At this time, I'd like to ask the community to make comments on this. Okay, seeing none, could you please poll the board?
Director Cicada?
Yes.
Director Ryan?
Yes.
Director Engelbert?
Yes.
President Thomas?
Yes. Okay. All right, going on to 4C. This is information regarding the March 19th, 2019 Copperopolis Town Hall meeting and my birthday celebration.
And you had a party of 35.
Yeah.
Let me make sure this PowerPoint is functioning properly. My apologies. Okay, there we go. All right. Good afternoon, Mr. President, members of the board. I am pleased to present an update on the town hall meeting that we held in Copperopolis on March 19th. This was held at Black Creek Hall down in Copperopolis at the Copper Cove Community Center. And we were very pleased to have President Thomas give the welcome and introduce our new general manager, Michael Minkler, to the group of about 30 to 35 people who attended. So we were very pleased to see such a good attendance when we're still about a year out from construction on this project. Lee and Rowe is our consultant who we hired to do the planning and design for this project. And Kevin Kennedy gave a presentation, a very detailed presentation to the community about the project plans and the anticipated impacts, and took questions throughout the presentation. And what we did, before I go into the comments we got, is everyone familiar with the project that we're talking about with the sewer infrastructure upgrades around Lake Tulloch? I just want to make sure that we're all on the same page there. Okay. So we took comments and we wrote down all of the questions that were asked during the presentation. We also had small groups after the presentation was over, and we took additional notes on those comments. And so we have a draft list of comments that we are going to be consolidating into the most commonly asked questions and then providing answers. And as I go around throughout the community this spring and summer, and as we get close to construction next year, we will be providing this list of questions and answers to community members to make sure that there's a full understanding. So I just wanted to give a quick summary of some of the main things that we heard during the town hall meeting. So what was really commented on throughout the entire meeting were the impacts on traffic on the heavily trafficked streets. And so we heard about O'Byrne's Ferry Road, Connor Estates Drive, Kiva Drive, and then also some smaller streets. And so one thing that we are going to be looking at very closely is how can we stage this in a way that will minimize traffic impacts. Additionally, we heard that the lake is very busy during the summer and then into fall, and that us being in there doing work and closing maybe part of the street or half of the street will be a big deal. And so we're going to try to do what we can to not be blocking streets during the peak times around Lake Tulloch. However, that's also prime construction season, so we need to balance those two things. Equipment doors was mentioned, so we're going to try to start and stop at appropriate times. Cost control, there were questions about where the money was coming from, and so we were very pleased to let those ratepayers know that the 2013 and 2014 rate increases for capital improvement are directly funding these on the sewer side, and without that, it would be very difficult, if not impossible, to fund a project like this. We also heard about planning for future growth. So when we're designing this project, are we designing it for the current demand, or are we going to oversize it a little bit so we could accommodate future demand? The community is concerned about hiring local contractors. They'd like to see that done when possible. Mitigating impacts on local businesses, and then making sure that we don't have a negative impact on emergency services. So we have about 3 pages of comments. This is just a portion of those. There certainly were other things, but these were the main ones that we heard. And so what we left the community with was thank you for the input. We've taken this down. We're taking your concerns into consideration. And we will be coming back and visiting each and every property owners association or homeowners association. So I will be going out and making presentations to each and every one of those, so those boards and those communities are individually informed and understand what's coming. And then we're also going to be accepting comments throughout the CEQA process, and so that's probably going to be the next 2, 3, 4 months before that's done. We also are posting all this information on our website, and we will continue to have a page specifically for this project as we go along where all this information is posted. Similar to the Reach 3A project in Arnold, we want to keep people very updated all the way through so there are no surprises. And that's why we're starting a year in advance of anticipated construction. And we will hold more community meetings when we get farther along in the process. And you may be interested in knowing what the process is. Well, just showing you here, design and environmental review and plans and specifications will be between now and fall of this year. And then construction is expected for 2020 in the spring. So we have construction starting in 2020, and then we have that going throughout the whole year and into 2021, and hopefully completing the project in the fall of 2021. Now, this is something that can be adjusted. We did talk about potentially making the project a little bit longer and just doing one side of the lake first, the next side of the lake after that, or consolidating them together and trying to get both projects done as soon as possible. And there are folks who you generally felt they wanted to see that construction done as soon as possible so we could be in and out and they could get back to their normal routines. And so we took the comments, we continue working on planning, engineering, design with Lee and Rowe, and we'll continue keeping the community updated, and of course, we'll continue to keep the board updated. This is roughly a $5.25 million construction project according to the preliminary estimate, and the planning and design and engineering is costing about $400,000. That's the process that we're in right now. Are there any questions from the board on the town hall meeting?
No, you made a reference to the number of homeowners associations down there. How many are there?
There are quite a few. The ones I will be visiting are Poker Flat Lake Tulloch Shores, Calypso Bay, Connor Lake Estates, and Copper Cove Association. So those are the four where I will be presenting. This town hall meeting was one where we invited the entire community, all the HOAs, to come together and come to one central location.
One thing on one of those the questions that seems to be appropriate or going on right now is the design that I think we've already started. And I do want to just make sure that we are designing it for a little bit of expansion in the year.
And my understanding is that we have considered the projected expansion within that. Now, there were some community members who maybe thought that we should even go bigger than what we have, but that's something that Charles and our consultant Lee and Rowe have been thinking about, and that's also part of the master plan, which was recently completed, looking at that in great detail.
Go ahead.
No, there was just someone in the audience
Yeah.
held up two hands, talking about the number of homeowners associations down there.
Yeah, there are about 9
9.
in total. And they're all very happy about everything.
So that I could see the benefit of doing it all at one time, because, the impact on that small, your tourism and.
Well, there were a lot of kind of unanticipated comments that after hearing them, I thought, well, why didn't I think about that? But the population literally doubles
Right.
during the summertime and vacation periods down there. There were some people that were talking about how much of a headache that they're anticipating having traffic-wise on Old Burns Ferry Road if there's intermittent traffic flow, limited to one lane going at a time. So the consultant really has his work cut out for him to, the consultant and our staff, to have the bid package be very clear about what's going to be required to minimize those impacts. So,
Because we can remember what it was to Little John Road a few years ago. The traffic.
well, I can remember when we didn't have Little John.
Oh, now, come on, just because you had a birthday.
No. But anyway, welcome, sir.
Yeah, so I apologize, I got tied up.
We know how that works. Yeah, I sympathize. Any other questions from the board? I will want to come back to one of these plats here after we hear some public comment. I know that Mr. Copeland has expressed a desire to talk. And before we do that, we have the supervisor that represents this area, Mr. Mills. Do you have any thing you would like to come and say about this subject?
Thank you for a moment of your time. The county did recently complete a traffic study on the O'Burns Ferry Bridge to indicate what is our flow rate there per day, and it's 4,000 vehicles per day. Now, whether all of those land into Poker Flat at Dutchess or whether they continue on towards Highway 4 is something we did not look at. But also to indicate, too, that the traffic flow study was completed on Highway 4 at Main Street. And that is a little over 4,000 vehicles per day as well, both eastbound, westbound from that location. So that would help to kind of give you an idea of what kind of traffic impact you would be dealing with. And I think that just having those numbers, you can contact Mr. Pack over at our Public Works to determine, because there are certain times of the day and there's also a certain days of the week that it is higher than it would be at other times. So trying to coordinate what that looks like, I think would be helpful in your construction schedule. Thank you.
Take a seat close by. I think we have some other questions for you. Okay, Mr. Copeland. Welcome, Ralph.
Hi. Mr. Thomas, Mr. President, birthday boy. Okay, I think getting to know the board my first time here, I had a couple more copies of what got here. So who doesn't have it? Here we go. Sure. Okay, my name is Ralph Copeland. I live in Copperopolis. I was at the CCWD Copperopolis meeting. I'd like to thank the district for the informative outreach last week. Transparency is important. Also, as customers, we have a responsibility to attend and contribute. At the meeting, I made a couple suggestions, and see below, and I added one. The first suggestion I had was CCWD should adopt a higher Calaveras County policy in their bid documents. This would encourage bidding contractors to use Calaveras County companies and manpower. The bidding contractors would have to list the local companies in their bid docs or produce a good faith effort document. Many municipalities and districts invoke this clause. Sometimes they add like 2% or 3% of their subcontractor base to be local companies. Pre-qualifying bid contractors is number 2. The ground around Copperopolis is extremely hard rock. My concern is an unqualified contractor not familiar with excavation and pipe installation under these conditions. This opens the district to delays or extra work orders for an unqualified contractor. Speaking of increasing the transmission line sizes, the district should have bid alternates, which should show a one-size pipe increase. In other words, have a bid item for a 4-inch transmission main, an alternate bid item for a 6-inch transmission main, and so on. This gives the district an opportunity to upgrade their original proposals if monies allow. Also, the district should consider buying a couple of their products direct from their manufacturer, especially the magnetic meters. That's a good product to buy direct, and possibly even the ductile iron pipe that you'll be using. That may not be a bad product to buy direct. Supervisor Mills spoke at a meeting at Poker Flat HOA in Copperopolis. He gave an update on a turn pocket on O'Burns Ferry Road. I believe he said construction end of 2019? Okay, well, perfect. Okay, 2020. I believe the sewer line replacement is in the same location as the turn pocket and the utility pole relocation. So either way, it'd be wise for CCWD to take lead and coordinate with those involved in the turn pocket project. I mean, if you're going to have 3 crews out there, you might as well consider the traffic flow, 4,000 a day. Okay, my last concern is future housing development. The district is not in the business to forecast future housing tracts. The district footprint is guided by customer service monies, including recent bill increases, the general plan, and existing lots and existing service connections. At the Copperopolis meeting, Tom Hicks was in attendance. Mr. Hicks is the lead for the new Copper Valley Development Group. During the meeting, while sitting next to Mr. Hicks, Russ Thomas asked the project manager about increasing the capacity of the new system to accommodate new developments. My thought is, if the district were to respond to every housing tract proposed in Copperopolis over the past 10 years, we'd have a 24-inch transmission main with 12-inch sewer laterals. The question by the district director is unacceptable. That may be harsh because Mr. Hicks is becoming a very strong figure in the community. I was in the pipeline material project management for 35 years. The norm is to have the private developer pay for any and all infrastructure improvement. Improvements from roads and utilities to schools and shopping centers. This is required to handle the increase in utility usage over the project once the project has been signed off and construction is imminent. You do not use existing residents' monies to line the developer's pockets. Thank you.
Thank you, Ralph. Okay, on that particular observation, I was sitting next to Mr. Hicks. He does not have any proposed projects that are even in close proximity to this project, but I said I wanted to come back to one of the plats you've got in your presentation here, a project overview showing the west side of Lake Tulloch, parentheses for future.
Is this the actual map itself?
It's in the presentation that you gave us.
Oh, so I attached the full presentation. I do have that slide. I don't have every slide in your packet, but I do have that one.
That one, yeah. Okay, now, Mr. Mills, you may have some, go back to the other one. You may have some information, late-breaking information on this, but I've been told that there where you have Connor Estates Drive, there's I don't know, 40 acres there or so that has been the subject of a number of proposals in the past, but the scuttlebutt that I've heard is that there is an owner, a local owner, that is proposing to put about 250 units on that project, or on that parcel, and he's actually approached the county about it. I agree with Ralph's suggestion or stating the facts that development is supposed to pay for its pro rata share of development. But if there is an application for 250 houses on that parcel, and we've got a new pipeline being installed on that road, I think that this might be a question for our legal staff over here and our general manager, is that I've been involved in putting in PG&E lines, and there is a reimbursement mechanism. You can upsize, and then the district can get from the developer to pay his pro rata share of that upsize. I think that there's a mechanism that we could use to do that.
Can I make a comment?
Yeah.
I'm assuming that we're, over the years, we've had the Copper Town plan that showed about 50,000 residents. And everything we've ever done,
40.
well, whatever it was, we've always planned for expansion. And so I'm assuming that this design is accommodating expansion to the extent that it can. We're not, that will ultimately be paid for with connection charges by developers, which will be their share. Ratepayers don't have to pay for expansion. But it doesn't mean that we don't plan for it, and I assume that we are thoroughly planning for all the proposed developments that are on the books today, and we should be thoroughly planning for whatever the general planning map now looks like. So I'm assuming all that's true, just like it has been for the last 30 years. Am I accurate in that? So it's not a gift of anything to a developer to plan for the community's ultimate build out. That's nonsense. No, it's called planning.
Yeah, I wouldn't mind if Charles would address that specifically most closely to the growth.
And also just, I'll add that there are mechanisms where under certain agreements, there can be infrastructure that's dedicated for specific development where it's done ahead of time. There are also, and probably more common, as you're talking about here, where connection charges the development essentially recoups costs that have been expended for the planned development under this specific plan, for example.
Just as Jeff was describing.
Correct.
Well, generally, this has happened before in Locatin area. We had to extend state required that we increase our pond storage, and there was already 1,000 or so ratepayers that were there, And so when staff designed the new pond, because there was also, we also planned for future development, but we didn't charge the people who live there for the future development expansion part. You had to separate those two. But many times, if a regulatory thing comes, it's not solely the developer's responsibility to bring something, if the state changes the rules for, to bring something up to a different standard, the existing ratepayers are sometimes on the hook for that. You know, because without any new development, it'd still be required, so we have to separate that, you know, economically, so we charge everybody what is, you know, considered to be reasonable.
I am sure glad you showed up.
No, I apologize. I guys show up at 9 o'clock today, and I don't know if they're gonna show up tomorrow, but we'll see.
I meant that in all sincerity, because Director Davidson has kind of the font of wisdom about everything that's happened here for the last, what, 35 years or something?
Sure feels like it. But anyway, I mean, I guess the question we were asking are that, you know, is, you know, we're clearly planning this for the build-out of the copper area, you know, to the extent that we can. I mean, we can't forecast too far ahead, but.
Right, this project is primarily serving the existing customers there within Poker's Flats. I mean, there is some infill lots in there as well, so it should be able to handle all that. And as far as, you know, the adjacent parcel, so, yeah, and then the second objective is also to you know, get the line out from under the lake. So it's the majority of the project is for existing customers, but as far as, you know, when facilities throughout any service area where they can be, you know, designed to accommodate expansion, you know, that's always something to be considered in the analysis. So in this particular case, you know, there is kind of, mostly it's just infill development, I would say, you know.
Okay.
So was the new subdivision addressed? Did
I'm not aware that we've had any application for that site recently. I mean, I know it's probably, you know, listed as residential development, but, you know, it is very close to the main lift station, so it's possible that these facilities, these new facilities that are designed for this project will not really be necessary for that adjacent subdivision to be serviced. You know, it may be able to flow by gravity directly over to the main lift station, which is where the number 40 is up in there, the triangle, that's the main lift station. So they may be able to flow directly by gravity into there. So
Where does it go from 40?
then 40 is the main regional lift station for that side of Lake Tulloch. So then it's very high pressure pumps that pump it back out to O'Byrne's Ferry Road and all the way down to Copper Cove Drive, and then it picks up at Lower Cross Country Lift Station, or Lift Station 22, and then that pumps it up over the ridge to Lift Station 21, and then over to the sewer plant from there.
Okay, so there's nothing in this proposal that would extend the pipe continuing northbound on O'Byrne's Ferry Road?
Yeah, there's no reason, yeah, there was actually another sewer, the main sewer line went directly across Lake Tulloch, and a couple decades ago, they removed that line. So,
But there, where you see the two roads going together, Connor Estates Drive and O'Byrne's Ferry Road, at that specific point, will there be new pipeline that will continue northbound on O'Byrne?
No, it would not. There's already a line there that
Okay.
we're currently using. So.
6-inch line?
Probably 6 or 8, yeah, it's probably, yeah, somewhere in that order of magnitude, yeah.
Okay, if we had our new GPS system, you'd be able to look at your phone and tell exactly.
We're working on that too.
So this pipe replacement is only for current vacant lots that are there in the existing homes?
Correct, correct.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, Ralph, you have one other comment. Come to the microphone. Ken?
Good question. Yeah, the pipeline, the new pipeline, you've increased your size, correct? Like the 4-inch line transmission mains are not going to be increased to 6-inch and 6-inch going to 8, or are they staying the same?
Well, this is, so basically there's no real, I mean, the new transmission main is not really, we've looked, the engineer does an analysis, they look at basically what, it's more a factor of how much horsepower versus what size line, so there's a lot of math involved in that, so you have to figure out what's the velocity of the line, what's your starting elevation, what's your ending elevation, and how much horsepower, the smaller the line, the more horsepower you might have to put into it to convey between the two, point A and point B. So, yeah, I think we decided to go with a slightly larger line with a little bit lower velocity so that, it could handle more flow in the future if it needed to additional flow.
Okay, so it sounds like there's a future plan for your replacement.
Yes.
And with extra sewage, of course, you're going to have, let down the line, you're going to have to expand your treatment line.
Well, that's just, in general, yeah, it's one of our higher growth areas, Copper Cove, not just, over on the east side of Lake Tulloch, but, throughout that whole service area, there's a lot of new development planned, and that, yes, the sewer plant will eventually have to accommodate that.
We also have the copper, we have a recent Copperopolis sewer master plan, don't we?
Correct.
I mean, if you need to look at that to get some information, that'd probably be helpful. But that's got more to do with the expansion of the facility in the long term and development projections and such.
Okay, do we have any other public comments? Okay, if not, okay, this is just for information purposes only, so any other board comments, wrap-up comments, Joel?
I would just leave you with the very last comment that was made was from a resident who thanked us for doing this project and investing in their community, and it was really very wonderful to hear that from a community member. So it left the meeting on a very good note.
Nice, yeah. I heard that too. It was good. Okay, going on to item 4D. This is a discussion and an action adopting district's financial management policy number 5.02, the purchasing policy. Jeffrey Meyer.
Good afternoon, Mr. President, members of the board, and Director Davidson. I know you made a special effort to come hear this particular item as it interests you.
I was hoping you'd move it up to the front.
The item before you today is to update the district's purchasing policy, which was last updated in April 2014. There's a couple reasons why we updated this policy. One, there's some ministerial changes, but more importantly, there was some items that were pointed out in our last couple audits regarding federal awards and the need to have specific language within our purchasing policy that makes sure our contracting language complies with Section 200.318 of Title II U.S. Code of Federal Regulations. So what we've done is gone through the purchasing policy, made some ministerial changes, minor things, like changing CCWD to district throughout, consistency. We changed the title of the Director of Utilities to Director of Operations to reflect what the current title is for Damon. But the most important thing is really related to that particular policy, and that is actually within your, we have it in two sections. First off, if you go to page 8, it's all in blue, the additions are in blue, and it's a uniform guidance requirements. We outlined that, and that specifically then references Appendix A, which is cut and paste from the general procurement standards from the uniform guidance requirements, section 200.318. That's where that's the reason why we brought this to you today. It's been in front of the Finance Committee on March 19th. They have reviewed it, made some comments, and approved it and forwarded it to your board for adoption. I do also want to point out one other thing, and this was into comments that was just in the last item. I believe it was 2010, maybe even a little earlier, and Director Davidson and Director Underhill, I believe, were here, when we created a local preference section on, and this is on page 15, section 5.02.12, a local preference program that was initiated to make sure we recognize the use and contributions of local contractors to our projects. And a couple key points there. This is for projects exceeding $50,000. You can get, what we look at is 5% of the total bid amount up to a maximum of $50,000. So when we do look at these construction contracts, they do get benefits for using local contractors. So this is already built into our purchasing policy, and I believe, I think it was 2010 or somewhere there.
I know we've had some sort of policy forever. The problem with it is you can't always use it if it's federally funded. None of that stuff applies. So there's there's times when we can use it, there's times when the law doesn't allow us to do anything except take the lowest bidder, so.
This is true, but I just wanted to point that out to your board. And at this point, I'll take any questions.
On that particular subject about local contractors, after our last meeting where we approved that contract for Mozingo, we made reference to the fact that Tykert was one of the bidders. I see 3 trucks driving into Copperopolis every night of Tykert employees. So although the company may be located elsewhere, there's people that live in our communities that work for these outside companies. So I don't know how, if that ever gets factored into these things where they have employees that live locally.
Yeah. It's generally the location of the company, but you're right. And we do have people who work in these areas. We have utilized them in the past for some of our projects. The Flying Acres Assessment District Construction Project utilized local people in that, where they were actually a company that was based outside the county, had people working within the county. So we do take that into account when we can. As Director Davidson said, when we use grant money and federal money, the restrictions are much more onerous.
Could we get a local contractor to come in and find out why we're sparking?
I believe it's the energy emitting from the center of the dais.
Something to do with the tie.
That's something to do with it.
I saw that. I was.
It's that silk tie. It's got static electricity on it.
Sewer master plan should be discussed after that.
John and I will come in after the meeting and we'll start doing some research. He's tried to tweak it, but yes, that's one of our things that we're going to look at.
Okay.
I move for adopting this resolution for district's financial management policy. Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any public comment on this item? Okay, seeing none. Rebecca, would you please poll the board?
Yes.
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 Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Senator.
Senator. Okay. We have an old business item here. Peter is going to give us a report on the update of the sustainable groundwater management effort.
Thank you, Mr. President. I apologize, these seem to be getting longer and longer, but as there's more and more actions coming out of the Joint Powers Authority, I feel like it's important that you're at least somewhat knowledgeable about the planning efforts and what goes into the plan, so that you're prepared to adopt it come the end of summer, hopefully, if we can keep things on track. So with regard to where the groundwater sustainability planning effort is, we are still working through project and management actions right now. Those will probably be up to the Joint Powers Authority for approval in April. They're also still working on pursuing some grant funding for some new monitoring networks. and also doing some releases of the chapters as part of an initial review by staff at the individual GSAs right now. But the public review period is very much upon us here very soon. So I just wanted to highlight that there are some changes to the number of the groundwater sustainability agencies and the Joint Powers Authority. Lathrop successfully petitioned to the state to remove themselves from the Eastern San Joaquin groundwater subbasin. It's an interesting
How'd they do that?
request. They felt that they were, because of where they lied, that they're more in the Tracy subbasin. So technically,
They're just moving the line.
yeah, they moved the line. So technically, the city of Lathrop is outside the basin, but their wells are actually very clearly in the basin, so I don't know how that, but yeah, so it's interesting, but the Department of Water Resources approved it, so they are working in the Tracy subbasin now, so. And then Woodbridge Irrigation District has at this time notified the Joint Powers Authority that they intend to withdraw as a GSA. There's still some things that need to be hammered out with regard to that. But at this point, there are 15 groundwater sustainability agencies in the Joint Powers Authority. So it's not as simple as just sending a letter saying that you don't want to participate anymore. So with regard to the pathway for the groundwater sustainability plan preparation, right now the consultant this month was preparing budgets, basically water budgets at the groundwater sustainability agency level. I'll get a little bit more detail on what that entails within my presentation here. And they have started meeting with groundwater sustainability agencies through February and March. Actually, we had a meeting immediately prior to this meeting with individuals in the Eastside GSA to go over some of those numbers and some of the details of those budgets. And then through that budget process, the idea is that they will start to determine potentially how they'll go about funding and pulling together projects that are meaningful towards meeting progress for the purposes of a groundwater sustainability plan. And then also could apply that at basically the entire subway, basin-wide level as well. So I won't get into that too much, but I just wanted to take time today to give you a little bit of a overview of the model and what went into that model and how that is driving what's in these individual budgets for groundwater sustainability agencies. Models are very complex. I don't pretend to be an expert. I do know that sort of you treat it like a box and there's inputs that go in and things that come out that kind of project things going forward. So that's very simplistic. That's not accurate. But so essentially, I just wanted to highlight that the model is required. As part of the groundwater sustainability plan, you have to have a hydroconceptual model as required by SGMA regulations. This model effort was actually funded by Prop 1 during the 2016-2017 timeframe. And they started that development back in 16-17, actually prior to a lot of the groundwater sustainability agencies being formed, pulling together a lot of technical data necessary for that. And here we are today. Last summer, they kind of started to finally calibrate that model, and that model is being utilized to drive a lot of the decisions for this groundwater sustainability plan, including setting criteria for the various things that are required coming out of the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act. So just to highlight kind of the components that go into the hydrologic conceptual model. You essentially have what's called an integrated water flow model. It takes a lot of things like demands, historical demands typically, historical hydrology, and tries to push that out for the term of this plan, and then you can start to sort of project out what the expectations are while playing around with different things like adding in projects, taking away projects, changing demands, and also it just gives you a good picture on where the basin will be over the time frame of the planning, I guess the planning horizon. So what you have is a bunch of individual nodes that all have each of these hydrologic components applied to them. In total, there's tens of thousands of nodes. They're all about a quarter mile each, these little triangles that you see above. And so each one of those gets sort of an individual piece of a geographical area. You could apply things like geology, hydrology, precipitation, land uses. You could kind of start to think about things like evapotranspiration. And then you really start to incorporate things like surface water deliveries and the flows coming in from the boundaries outside of these individual little pieces of the entire basin. So those are all kind of independently calibrated, and they're working together, and that's how you start to pull together the picture of what comes out of that model. Oh, yeah, so excuse me, it's 16,000 elements. The average area is 76 acres, and across the model area, you basically have spacing of about a little more than a quarter mile. And then that tightens up around the river courses, because the idea is that you want to have a really good picture of what's going on near the rivers with regard to groundwater movement, how people are taking groundwater out. It's sort of required by SGMA that you evaluate groundwater dependent ecosystems, and then also some of the influence that groundwater has on riverine systems as well. So this is just kind of a quick overlay. I should mention that what you see up there also includes some subbasins above and below, those being the Cosumnes and the Modesto subbasin. They are not considered critically overdrafted by the Department of Water Resources, so they're on a different planning horizon. Their plan is due in 2022. So SGMA requires that these plans all be coordinated, but they're not necessarily all going to come out at the same time. So that should be interesting. But there are opportunities to revisit this plan on, every 5 years or so that these things can start to work together a little better. But these plans are all supposed to be coordinated amongst the basins that are adjacent. So just to point out that they calibrated the model to kind of see what the expectations are for how much certainty there is. Within 10 or 20 feet, you kind of see, more or less certainty with regard to that. So there's kind of I like this slide right here. It just shows you that models are not perfect, right? Anybody can take it and cut it apart like Swiss cheese. They're just meant to project out things. We know that there are a lot of things that could go either way. So especially with regard to groundwater pumping, you see the 20% uncertainty on that. They don't know what's being pumped with any specific clarity or certainty. A lot of that is the same with regard to percolation or flows coming in and out of different areas. So just the consultant, everyone in the public should know that this model isn't exact. So I think there's a lot to be said for the state allowing us to come in and build our own plan with the knowledge that there's a lot that we don't know. And the idea is that you have a planning horizon and you can continue to learn as you go. So.
During the last couple of sessions on this water budget, it relates to the east side where we live and work. We've been trying to convince them to get more closely to what we do know. I mean, you emphasize that there's a lot we don't know, but I didn't get the impression that they were giving enough credibility to what we were talking about the limitations on groundwater pumping, that they're assuming that we're pumping a lot more than we are, and they weren't giving enough attention to the inflows that we're providing. So, and I hope that as we go forward, which, are you going to report on the changes that we're making? So.
Yeah, so I think I have a slide here that we can talk a little bit about that.
Okay.
So, with regard to these water budgets that I introduced, they use sort of 3 categories: historical, current conditions, and then obviously you got to try to project out. So a lot of those take into things like land use, whatever plans you have. They use urban water management plans, a lot of ag plans and other things to try to project these things out. And then there's also a lot of things that aren't perfect, like we talked about today with regard to actual ag acreage. No one necessarily has a good idea of what is being pumped using groundwater as far as agriculture goes, but they use something called it's like Landsat, or use a satellite imagery to try to come up with crop types, and applies that across these nodes that we showed. So what you'll end up with is you'll have sort of these budgets that take into account a lot of things like surface water deliveries, groundwater pumping, and then those demands going out. So as you can see, this is sort of a historical condition. So they've chosen to use the 20-year time frame leading up to 2015 when Sigma was in place. That's required that you incorporate that 2050 time frame. And so they're going back 20 years, and then what they'll do is they'll project forward 20 years based upon historical data. So essentially what you'll have is a budget that looks at all those things coming in. We talked about, inflow, additional growth, additional demands, and then they can sort of come up with at least a GSA level where they see a deficit going forward. So yeah, I think with the current conditions, as I mentioned, I think I'm going to skip over a lot of these, but they've taken in a lot of the historical documentation. They looked at urban demands, they looked at agricultural water plans, and some other things as well. And so you can see how they kind of project those out, depending upon the types of crop types and other things for the individual GSAs, and then they can come up with an expected water demand associated with that. And then people are expected to fill in projects behind that, possibly to tip the balance either way. So again, they kind of did the same for projecting those out, and they utilize a lot of existing planning documents as well. So I just wanted to mention that President Russ Thomas and your general manager, Mr. Michael Minkler, we met with county staff this month, Supervisor Mills and employees from the CAO's office. Basically, the intent of the meeting was to find ways that we can coordinate better, and how CCWD can basically assist county in their going forward with the policy implications that may come out of a groundwater sustainability plan. We always kind of felt that considerations of land use and policies associated with pumping or well permitting, we recognize that that is the county's responsibility, and the idea is that I think from a general standpoint, CCWD doesn't want to be dictating policy for the county that may be impactful. So what is going to happen next is there will be a joint presentation on April 9th with CCWD and Calaveras County staff. They're going to look at ways to potentially fund a position over at Calaveras County to continue this work after the groundwater sustainability plan is completed, and work more in a lead capacity with regard to policy and ordinance that may come out of that. So that is kind of what they're contemplating. And then, CCWD would continue to serve in our technical capacity in whatever way we can as well, I think. One of the ideas is that we would like the county to take a more active role with regard to some of this in the future. And Michael, you can speak to this a little more, but I think the idea is that we didn't want to be seen as dictating policy that may be impactful to their authorities. So,
what authorities in conflict?
I think with regard to general plans require that groundwater sustainability plans are incorporated into those general plans. And so there's a lot of issues associated with land use and how those will play out. So if we're dictating thresholds, other things like that, there was just.
We're not even, with the exception of Wallace Lake, we don't even use groundwater in the county. The county is the land use authority. We don't have anything to do with land use.
And this is exactly why we wanted to make sure, it was mainly an effort to make sure that our level of involvement is proportionate to what our groundwater activity is, and that the county's level of involvement is also similarly proportionate, so that they have a much more, they have much more broader authority over groundwater permits and wells and, you know, all of that land use than we do. And so we wanted to make sure that we're working together and that collaboration is proportionate.
And there's kind of the shoe that will eventually drop is that, you know, this could conceivably cause pumpers to be restricted on the amount of gallons or feet that they can pump. And our agency doesn't have the ability to pack it down and go enforce those rules. The county
Well, I don't believe we have any, that wouldn't be our agency's issue, it would be the county's issue. Because
Right.
everybody who pumps from us pumps out of the river.
That's exactly why we wanted to make sure the county's also as engaged in this as we are, because we don't have that authority, so. And also, I'd just comment that the way Sigma works is that the GSA interacts with the county, it is supposed to with regard to certain land use issues because of this, I won't say conflict, but the challenges that come up in land use planning and groundwater management. And also another thing to keep in mind is that the GSA for the east side is currently governed by an MOU between CCWD, the county, Rock Creek, and Stanislaus, correct, Stanislaus. And so that's the entity that's the GSA, which needs to interact with the county. So the whole idea is that it's beneficial to have the county involved and an active participant in these conversations.
And who from the county attends those meetings currently?
Supervisor Mills has to date been engaged on this. I check in with Brian Moss in his capacity as Assistant CAO pretty regularly on things as they move forward. But I think that they acknowledge that going forward, there's going to be a component that is going to need their dedicated attention.
Most likely somebody from environmental health, I would imagine.
I'm not
They have the
dictating
authority,
that.
that's who handles the wells now. That's the groundwater.
But a letter has been prepared and it's going to be submitted very soon that will remove me from that, being the GSA's representative, and Walt Ward was the alternate, to make Supervisor Mills the representative, and Walt will continue to be the alternate. So I still will be occasionally attending the meetings, but I don't have any responsibility to go every time.
And who did you say, Walt?
Walt Ward, he's Walter Ward, he's employee of Stanislaus County, a very, very bright guy on water issues and geology. And incidentally, he also works in coordinating up to 5 other GSAs
So
that
he's
surrounds. Yeah, he's
Quite involved,
immersed.
yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. Peter, is there any public comment on this item? Okay, let's go on to item 6A, the general manager report.
I just got to first thank staff for the great presentations today. Up until a few minutes ago, I didn't say a word. That shatters my previous record of not speaking in a board meeting, which was like 95 seconds, I think, and now we're at 2 hours in. But great job, Jeff and Joel and Peter. And the one tough question we had, Director Davidson did such a good job answering it, I didn't have to speak up. So, just a few quick notes on some of what I've been up to. I've participated in a Liebert Cassidy labor relations training seminar recently, just on part of my effort to gear up on that front. I've been spending as much time as I can, which isn't a whole lot, but trying to dedicate one day or a half a day a week to making it out into the field and thanks to Damon for a lot of time kind of shuttling me around and meeting our crew and getting to know our infrastructure. It's definitely a really important component for me because it gives me the ability to visualize what it is we're talking about when we need to make decisions, when we need to prioritize projects. You know, instead of it just being a list of projects, I can actually, you know, have some experience with it. So it's been very helpful. One heads up on a future budget item. Just want to give you a quick seed. At the next, I think it's the next board meeting, we'll have a representative from Enterprise Fleet Management here to talk about a vehicle leasing program that I think has a lot of potential for cost savings and for reducing the average age of our vehicle fleet in a pretty a much faster fashion than we would otherwise be able to do. It looks like, so far at least, it looks like there's a lot of potential benefit to a fleet lease arrangement rather than trying to just replace, you know, a few trucks here and there every year. So there'll be, Damon's put a lot of work into that along with Jeff and Jesse, and the enterprise representative will be here at the next meeting to present some details to the board. Other than that, the staff is very actively in the throes of budget prep for next year, and that includes some activity on the grant front. There's a USDA new opportunity through USDA for potentially metering the system that we're looking at. We're working hard on trying to bring the Section 219 authorization home from DC that's been pending for a while, that if we don't get a project approved in the next budget cycle, or at least some expenditure of those funds in the next federal budget cycle, we're at risk of losing that money. So we're working hard on that. Yeah, we're busy. That's it.
Do you want to talk about the pod?
About the what?
The pod.
The pod.
No, but Supervisor Davidson does our trip to DC and
the pod.
The lavish accommodations.
I thought you said the pot.
No, the pod.
Sorry, President Thomas.
It's a whole different story.
That's a difference.
I'm not sure I have a comment on that. We are, and that's part of the Section 219 work that we're doing. But although we'd be doing that anyways, but we're putting also a lot of work into preparing for a field trip to DC next week, where we'll be meeting. We have a very ambitious itinerary, meeting with several senior regulatory staff folks, along with representatives from our congressional and Senate delegations, and I look forward to that being a productive few days.
How long will you be gone?
I will, Monday's a travel day. We have 2 days there, and then Thursday's a travel day back. We should be back in the office on Friday.
And you keep going.
Yeah.
Yes. All right, thank you very much for that. Cindy, can we start with you on the board reports?
I don't have anything for this meeting to report. IRW, didn't I talk about that at the last meeting?
Oh, we went to a meeting last week.
Which one was that?
The T-stand.
Was it last week?
She said nothing.
Nothing. Well,
We were alone.
Well, for the T-stand, what did we talk about?
the modeling thing that they didn't quite come together.
Well, that's why I can't remember.
I was gonna say, there's supposed to be, informational updates.
Informational.
I'll the next
Just wanna
meeting,
make
I'll
it feel
update
We
you.
don't necessarily need to know everything you did.
Yeah, I will update you at the next meeting. I wasn't prepared for it today.
Okay, thank you.
I have nothing to report as well.
Okay. I have nothing to report at this moment.
I have nothing to report.
Oh,
Okay, brother.
well, thank you all for all the time that I'm going to get.
And I didn't give any time to Bertha.
An article that I read that I've been making a couple of calls about is a TUD has done a rainwater storage tank rebate thing, and so I wanted to throw that out to our board or our general manager and see what we could do along the same lines. I think it's a great idea, and so I have an article if you would care to read that, okay? Mazingo is also in Blue Lake Springs, and because of the weather, they haven't been able to do anything for Blue Lake Springs, replacing their infrastructure, so they said just kind of,
Hang on.
yeah, so that's great that Mazingo got the 2 big contracts here in Calaveras County. I would like to see, we haven't heard about this in quite a while, outreach to our schools. I think that's, we really need to, build up interest in water projects.
Yeah, I know, I just saw on our calendar yesterday that Damon and Stacy will be attending an event at Columbia College in the near future. There was one other event that I don't recall off the top of my head, but there, to the extent we can be engaged in that, yeah, absolutely, we want to recruit.
Because
Like the IRWM and TCRCD, they have that trailer, I think I spoke to you about it last month. They have a trailer that you can take to the schools, and they'd be glad to do something on this side for CCWD.
Because I'll just say this kind of, I'm very proud of the fact that at the Aqua Convention, or Aqua Conference that we'll be going to in May, you will be seeing again another great presentation, and they'll be having a wonderful party for women in water. And you would be amazed at how many women all up and down the state of California are involved at every level in water. It is just, and we could, throw out that thought in our school presentations and what have you. Women in water, we're here. Look at, on both ends of the dais.
There you go.
Uh-huh.
Okay, is that all you wanted to report?
Yes, I'm through.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, just want to make it clear that the next meeting of this board will be on April 10th at 1 o'clock. The following meeting will be on April 24th at 1 o'clock. Now, we're going into a closed session regarding anticipated litigation. So, thanks. Oh, did you have a question, Marty?
I want to address something that Bertha just mentioned, if I may.
Of course.
Hi, Marty Crane, District 5. Bertha, thank you for bringing up our schools and women in water. Recently, you may have seen in the news that we had our annual science fair, and I'm honored to be a judge at the science fair. Not that I'm a scientist, but the judges are just amazing. And I often wonder why we couldn't maybe have our water board go and participate in the schools as mentors to some of these children to help them get interested and help them with their science project. Some of them have parents helping them, some of them have their teachers helping them, some of them are just doing it on their own. I fought really hard for this young woman who is too young to go to state, and so we came up with a new, she's going to be a marine biologist, and everybody just get out of her way. Looked at her presentation, and she did it all herself, and you could tell. Scissors and whatever, but you knew she knew what she was doing, but it hadn't met her. But you put her in the equation and literally get out of the way. So Dr. Lovett and I were a team on our judging panel. And so I was a little bit of the softer side, let's encourage them, and he was like, science, and he said she was undeterred. He said, when I was coming at her with questions, she was undeterred. I said, yeah, you just got to get out of her way. So it's an opportunity waiting, rich with possibilities. So please go for it. Thank you.
Thank you, Marty.
Last year, we attended the Bret Hart Job Fair, and Joel was there, I was there with MSD, and that's coming up. Did you get the notice? If you want to do that again.
Yes, it will also be on the right track event machine for conference to reach out to the high school students.
I forgot I wanted to mention that this young woman was so good. She'll be back next year. She's only in 5th grade, so we got her for a while. But, so lots of opportunity to grab onto her.
Hollers?
Pardon?
Her last name is Hollers from Vallecito.
I don't recall her name. I just so stunned by
Yeah,
her.
they're nodding their head, yeah.
But we actually invented another award for her, the Rising Star Award. So, anyway, yes, but I think it's definitely go in and say, with helping them with their projects, because some of them don't have a way to get there.
Thank you,
Thank
Marty.
you, Marty.
We're going to temporarily go into our closed session now, so.